London in the winter of 1817 moved beneath snow as beneath a hush, its grand avenues softened, its sharp judgments merely disguised, never silenced. Carriages creaked through white-dusted streets. Iron lamps glowed like distant stars, and behind the tall windows of Mayfair, society gathered with all the fervor of ritual, determined that frost would not delay ambition. It was the height of the London season, when marriages were negotiated as carefully as treaties, and a woman's worth was measured less by her heart than by the figures attached to her name. Aurelia Whitcomb entered this world as one might step onto thin ice, with careful grace and practiced composure. At 22, she possessed a beauty that did not shout but lingered. Dark eyes shaped by thoughtfulness, features softened by kindness rather than vanity, and a carriage learned from generations who had known comfort before it slipped away. Her lineage was impeccable, her manners faultless, yet her fortune had dwindled to a whisper, and whispers in London were rarely kind. She knew how she was spoken of, how matrons tilted their heads and lowered their voices when she passed, as though poverty were contagious. On the night of the Harrington Assembly, Aurelia wore pale blue silk altered more than once to keep pace with fashion, its elegance born of care rather than excess. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and expectation, every polished surface reflecting faces sharpened by calculation. She smiled when required, conversed when approached, and endured the familiar sensation of being appraised, weighed, and found lacking. Still, she held herself upright, believing dignity was the last inheritance no creditor could claim. When Duke Alastair Hawthorne arrived, the room shifted, as if acknowledging a force it could neither resist nor fully comprehend. At 24, he carried himself with the discipline of a man forged elsewhere, his bearing marked by campaigns fought on foreign soil and silences learned in harsher climates. His dark hair was worn plainly, his expression restrained to the point of severity, yet his presence commanded attention with effortless authority. He was spoken of with admiration and unease, a duke who had returned from war uninterested in frivolity, intent instead on fulfilling duty with ruthless efficiency. Introductions were made with polite inevitability. Aurelia was presented among others, her name spoken with respectful neutrality, though the omission of her dowry was conspicuous in its absence. The Duke listened, his gaze steady, his face revealing nothing. For a moment, she allowed herself the smallest hope that indifference might spare her. Instead, circumstance conspired against her, as it so often did, and a well-meaning acquaintance mentioned her reduced prospects with careless honesty. The Duke's reply was delivered not with cruelty, but with chilling precision. His voice did not rise, nor did it carry beyond those nearest, yet its effect was devastating. "She is not worth marrying," he said, as one might state a simple fact, already turning his attention elsewhere. There was no malice in it, only certainty, which made it far worse. Aurelia felt the words land as surely as if spoken directly to her. Heat rushed to her cheeks, though the room was warm, and for a breathless moment she feared she might falter. She did not. She inclined her head, excused herself with quiet courtesy, and moved away before pity could reach her. The true injury lay not in his judgment, but in the ease with which it had been rendered, as though her value were an equation long since solved. Around her, society absorbed the moment with avid interest. Some looked away, embarrassed by proximity to shame, while others stored the incident carefully for later retelling. Aurelia retreated to the edge of the room, her gloved hands clasped tightly together, resolving that she would not weep where anyone might see. She reminded herself that she had endured worse than a single sentence spoken by a man she did not know. Across the ballroom, Duke Hawthorne continued his conversations, untroubled, yet something unsettled him, though he could not have named it. The image of her composure lingered, her refusal to crumble an unexpected defiance. He dismissed the thought as distraction, for he had already resolved upon a suitable match, one that would strengthen his family's standing and satisfy expectation. As the evening drew on, Aurelia departed early, stepping back into the cold with relief. Snow fell steadily, erasing footprints almost as soon as they formed. She did not know that her name would be spoken again before the night ended, nor that the winter she believed would bury her hopes was only beginning to test them. In the hush of the carriage, she told herself survival required acceptance, unaware fate, patient and observant, had already begun to rearrange the careful distances between her and the man who dismissed her. The 12th night ball arrived, wrapped in a blizzard so fierce it seemed intent on testing the resolve of London itself. Snow struck the tall windows of the Cavendish townhouse in relentless waves, and yet inside, candlelight glimmered defiantly, reflecting off crystal and polished marble as though warmth alone might keep winter at bay. Attendance was thinner than usual, but curiosity proved stronger than comfort, and society gathered, cloaked in velvet and expectation, determined to witness who would rise and who would quietly fall. Aurelia Whitcomb entered without illusion. The events of the Harrington Assembly had not faded. If anything, they had sharpened her awareness. She felt the glances before she saw them, sensed the conversations that faltered when she passed. Still, she wore her ivory gown with quiet confidence, its simplicity a statement of restraint rather than defeat. She had come not to reclaim favor, but to remind herself she had not been erased. Duke Alastair Hawthorne arrived later, snow dusting his shoulders, his expression as unreadable as ever. He had told himself he attended out of duty alone, yet his gaze moved unbidden through the room until it found her. Aurelia stood near the musicians, listening with attentive calm, her posture betraying none of the strain beneath. He looked away at once, irritated by the persistence of her presence in his thoughts, and resolved to ignore her entirely. Fate, however, had little respect for resolution. As the evening progressed, the storm worsened, wind forcing its way through narrow gaps in the windows. The musicians faltered, fingers stiff with cold, until a violin string snapped with a sharp, echoing crack. Music collapsed into silence. Conversations halted. The room held its breath, for nothing unsettled a ballroom more than an unplanned pause. A host hurried forward, apologies spilling forth, but the damage was done. Eyes turned expectantly, unease rippling through the assembly. Someone laughed nervously. Another whispered. Then, with a gentleness that brooked no argument, Aurelia was urged toward the cleared floor, a suggestion framed as kindness but sharpened by daring. For a heartbeat she hesitated, the weight of scrutiny pressing upon her, before something steadier than fear took hold. She stepped forward. Without orchestra or accompaniment, Aurelia began to move, drawing upon a dance learned long before London had taught her to be careful. It was a country step, unfashionable and unguarded, shaped by memory rather than display. Her movements were fluid, expressive, unashamed of joy, and as she turned, snow drifted through a cracked window, settling briefly in her dark hair like scattered stars. Shock gave way to stillness. The dance was not perfect, but it was sincere, and sincerity, so rarely witnessed, held the room captive. Aurelia danced not to impress, but to fill the silence with warmth, to offer something human in a space ruled by calculation. When she finished, she stood breathless, eyes lowered, uncertain of what she had risked. The Duke had not moved. His attention, once disciplined and distant, was utterly claimed. In her steps, he saw an absence of pretense that unsettled him more deeply than beauty ever had. The battlefield had taught him to distrust softness, yet here was courage of another kind, quiet and resolute, daring enough to exist openly. He felt for the first time in years the slow, unmistakable shift of something long frozen beginning to yield. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then sincere. Aurelia inclined her head and withdrew, her pulse racing, unsure whether she had invited admiration or ridicule. She did not look for the Duke. She did not need to. Something irrevocable had passed between them without a single word exchanged. Later that night, as cloaks were gathered and carriages summoned, a small parcel was delivered discreetly into Aurelia's hands. Inside lay a pair of gloves lined with silk, unmarked by any crest, chosen with careful anonymity. She recognized the significance at once and felt both gratitude and alarm. Across the room, Duke Hawthorne watched her accept the token, knowing society would soon begin to wonder. Beneath the falling snow, the distance he had insisted upon no longer existed, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. As Aurelia stepped into the cold night air, the storm seemed gentler, though nothing within her felt settled. She understood that notice, once drawn, could not be easily escaped, especially when offered by a man of such rank. For the Duke, the evening lingered with uncomfortable clarity, his earlier certainty rendered fragile by a single, unguarded moment. London slept beneath snow, unaware that a quiet scandal had been born, one that would soon demand consequence, courage, and choice from them both. Neither understood how swiftly whispers traveled, nor how fate, once awakened, would press them together again, indifferent to rank, reputation, or carefully constructed resolve before the season ended. Aurelia first noticed a change in how she was regarded, not through words, but through absence. Invitations that once skirted past her name now arrived with careful promptness, and conversations paused when she entered, not with dismissal, but with curiosity sharpened by speculation. The gloves had been seen. The silence after her dance had been remembered. London, ever hungry, sensed the story unfolding and leaned closer, eager to be fed. Duke Alastair Hawthorne did nothing openly to encourage the rumors, yet neither did he extinguish them. He sought Aurelia's company with a precision that appeared accidental, positioning himself near her during promenades, addressing her with polite attentiveness during gatherings, and offering conversation that ventured beyond the superficial. His manner remained controlled, but his gaze lingered, as though measuring something he did not yet understand. Aurelia met his attention with courtesy and caution, aware that interest from a man of his rank could elevate or ruin her with equal speed. Their first private exchange occurred in a garden glazed with frost, trimmed hedges standing like silent witnesses. The Duke spoke of the cold, of how winter sharpened the senses, and she replied with careful observations that revealed more than intended. Words moved between them with restraint. Each sentence weighed, yet beneath the civility ran an unmistakable current. He offered her a book days later, its margins marked lightly, passages chosen with deliberate care. She understood the intimacy of such a gesture and accepted it without comment. As days passed, they spoke more freely, though never without awareness of unseen eyes. In a carriage shared due to convenience and storm, their shoulders brushed, and the contact lingered longer than propriety required. Alastair's voice softened when he addressed her, and Aurelia noticed the effort it cost him. She saw, too, the faint shadows beneath his composure, signs of battles not readily confessed. It was Aurelia who finally pressed beyond safety. In a quiet alcove lit by firelight, she spoke with calm resolve, thanking him for his attentions while questioning their purpose. Her dignity was unyielding, her tone respectful yet firm. She would not be paraded as a diversion, nor endure hope built on uncertainty. The Duke listened in silence, his expression unreadable, before answering with a candor that startled them both. He told her of duty, of inheritance shaped like a burden rather than privilege, of how war had taught him the cost of attachment. Marriage, to him, had always been strategy, never solace. He confessed that her presence unsettled that certainty, that her unguarded dance had revealed something he could neither command nor dismiss. His words were not a declaration, but an admission of fracture, and in it lay vulnerability he had never shared. Aurelia responded not with reassurance, but with truth. She spoke of endurance, of learning to stand straight while being measured and diminished, of how kindness could exist without promise. She did not ask him to change, only to recognize what stood before him. Their gazes held, and for a breathless moment, restraint wavered. Yet they stepped back, honoring the limits they both understood. The following morning brought consequence. News arrived that the Duke's family pressed for resolution, urging him toward a match advantageous and immediate. The weight of expectation settled heavily, familiar and relentless. Aurelia learned of it through whispers and prepared herself accordingly. She withdrew with grace, answering invitations less readily, guarding her heart with practiced composure. On the evening before his decision was expected, they met once more beneath falling snow. Words were few, but meaning crowded every silence. Aurelia wished him well, offering no plea, no protest. The Duke watched her depart, the sound of her footsteps fading into winter, and for the first time, certainty abandoned him entirely. The season had not yet ended, but something irrevocable had shifted, demanding an answer neither rank nor caution could delay much longer. He remained standing long after she was gone, the cold seeping through his gloves unnoticed, his thoughts unsettled in a manner no campaign ever had. Around him, London continued its rituals, blind to the quiet reckoning unfolding within one man's resolve. He knew that to choose safety would be to silence this unrest, yet to choose her would invite scrutiny fierce enough to scar generations. Aurelia, meanwhile, returned home resolved to accept whatever came, believing dignity meant relinquishing expectation. Still, as she removed her cloak and set aside the marked book, her fingers lingered on its pages, betraying a hope she had sworn not to voice. The storm outside eased, but neither of them slept easily, each aware that the next encounter would demand a decision capable of altering the careful course of both their lives, whether toward ruin or redemption. Morning waited patiently, prepared to witness the consequences of hearts no longer obedient. The final gathering of the season unfolded beneath a pale sky. Snow settled in quiet drifts along the steps of the Hawthorne residence, where lanterns burned with steady resolve. Aurelia arrived knowing this evening would close a chapter she had not meant to open, her composure firm, her expectations carefully extinguished. She wore silver-gray silk, modest yet luminous, chosen not to attract notice but to honor herself. Each step forward felt deliberate, as though she were walking toward an ending she had already accepted. Inside, the atmosphere was taut with anticipation. Conversations skimmed across the room, never lingering, every glance charged with speculation. Duke Alastair Hawthorne stood among his peers, listening as arrangements were discussed with practiced indifference, his posture impeccable, his thoughts anything but. The advantageous match proposed to him hovered unspoken yet omnipresent, a future neatly aligned with duty and approval. He had agreed to announce his intentions before the evening concluded, and society waited eagerly to applaud his compliance. Aurelia remained near the edge of the gathering, offering polite smiles, answering gently, preparing herself to leave without ceremony. When their eyes met across the room, there was no surprise left between them, only understanding edged with restraint. She inclined her head to him in farewell, a gesture of respect rather than surrender. It was then that the Duke moved. He crossed the room with measured steps, halting the current of conversation as effectively as any command. When he spoke, his voice carried with calm authority, clear enough to reach every attentive ear. He began by recalling a statement once made without reflection, words spoken in certainty and accepted without challenge. He repeated them slowly, allowing recognition to settle. Then, without raising his tone, he dismantled them. He spoke of error, of misjudgment born from habit rather than truth. He spoke of courage revealed not through rank, but through sincerity. He named Aurelia Whitcomb openly, acknowledging her dignity, her warmth, her worth unmeasured by fortune. Silence followed, profound and unmistakable. Society, so practiced in its reactions, faltered. Turning to Aurelia, the Duke addressed her alone. He did not kneel, nor did he plead. His proposal was offered with respect, framed as choice rather than rescue. He asked her to stand beside him as his wife, fully aware of the scrutiny it would invite, fully prepared to bear it. His words were steady, yet the vulnerability beneath them was unmistakable. Aurelia felt the room recede, leaving only the weight of the moment before her. She answered with equal composure, accepting not from gratitude, but from recognition. She spoke of partnership, of trust earned rather than assumed, and in doing so claimed her future with deliberate grace. Her assent was quiet, yet it carried more force than any spectacle. Reactions followed swiftly. Some faces reflected astonishment, others disapproval, thinly veiled, yet none dared challenge the decision openly. The Duke's resolve left little room for debate. In that instant, calculation yielded to conviction, and the balance of the room shifted accordingly. Later, as the gathering dissolved and carriages departed into the snow, Aurelia and Alastair stood together at the threshold, the night vast and still before them. No promises were exchanged beyond what had already been spoken. Their understanding required no embellishment. In the weeks that followed, London adjusted, as it always did. Whispers softened into acceptance, curiosity into admiration. The marriage, conducted with dignified restraint, was remembered less for its defiance than for its sincerity. Winter loosened its grip, and with the first signs of thaw came a sense of quiet renewal. For Aurelia, marriage did not erase her past trials, but it reframed them, granting her voice and standing earned through character rather than concession. For Alastair, love proved not a weakness, but a strength he had long denied himself. Together, they moved forward not as symbols, but as partners, their union a rare testament to choice within constraint. Yet those who had watched closely understood the greater truth. In a season ruled by arithmetic and appearance, two hearts had insisted upon recognition. Beneath falling snow and watchful eyes, dignity had been defended and affection chosen. London would tell the story for years, embellishing where it must, but the essence remained unchanged. One winter, one dance, one decision, and a future irrevocably altered. Their story did not end at the altar, but there it truly began, observed by a city already hungry for its next intrigue. Outside, snow softened into rivulets along the stone, winter loosening its hold. What awaited them would require patience, loyalty, and courage renewed, for love chosen once must be chosen repeatedly. The world would test them, as it tests all unions born of conviction rather than convenience, and time would reveal the full measure of what they had claimed together, despite doubt and distance.